upon a star.
Now we want you to share with us our latest and greatest dream. Disneyland.
Just go to Action Park. There's no other park like it.
Six Flags Great Adventure. It's not a world away.
Paramount's Kings Island.
We will officially open Universal Studios Florida.
Hello, I'm Michael Eisner.
Now, here is your host.
Hi, Defunctland guests. My name is Kevin Perger, and welcome back to the Defunctland podcast. Today, we will be finishing our discussion with Ron Schneider, and we will begin by discussing his work as the original walk-around Dreamfinder and Figment at EPCOT. So let's get to it. So, just to begin with, what was your experience with Journey into Imagination, the ride, your experience creating the walk-around character of Dreamfinder and Figment?
I first heard about the ride when I was working at Disneyland at the Golden Horseshoe Review. Tony Baxter gave a presentation to the employees about his current project, and he told us all about imagination and showed us pictures of Dreamfinder and Figment and mentioned they were going to be the only characters at Epcot Center. There wouldn't be any Mickey Mouse or Goofy. And I decided that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that character. I just thought there was a very rich cause, the process of imagination and communicating that to people. I got to take a preview look at the ride and use that as my Bible. And then they brought me out to Florida, and I got to do the character. And I was the first person to do the Dreamfinder. Nobody was there to train me. There was no Bible for me to work from. I was pretty much on my own. And I had a whole pavilion to play with and a beautiful dragon and a terrific character, and I was kind of thrown to the wolves. I've covered on a number of different podcasts the process, and it's in my book, the process that I went through to evolve the character. But basically, I was out there with the guests, and my mission was, as I saw it, to not just to pose for pictures and sign autographs, but to communicate the themes and ideas that were inherent in the ride. The idea that imagination is something that belongs to all of us. And if I could communicate that to the children, that they were creative beings, and get them to play with me creatively. If I could get the guests to suspend their disbelief and react to Figment and myself not as a theme park character, but as a crazy guy with a dragon, and get them to spontaneously play with me, that became my goal. And so I soon started working on ways of throwing the guests off kilter, giving them ways of interacting with me that would be unexpected and spontaneous. So that there was a whole mind game going on there between me and the guests. We had other Dreamfinders who came in, and I tried to teach them what I'd learned and what I wanted to do. But everybody, like I said, everybody likes to be Walt Disney, and these guys had their own ideas about what they want to do with the characters. So their Dreamfinders tended to be different, let's say, than what I was doing out there. But for 5 years, I had a wonderful time, and I miss working with Figment. I miss working with the kids. It was a very, very exciting time, especially when we first got there and there was no other Mickey Mouse or characters. We were kind of the spokesman for Epcot Center for a while there, and that was a lot of fun. The ride still affects people. I think the reason that the Dreamfinder is still remembered at all, and people are so fond of Figment, has nothing to do with what we did. Strolling the grounds. I think it all has to do with what Tony Baxter and his team at Imagineering did in the creation of the ride. They introduced these wonderful characters and told the story so well, and you were there when Dreamfinder created Figment at the top of the ride from his component parts, and you saw the affection Dreamfinder had for Figment. In the later versions of the ride, Figment is kind of treated like a nuisance, becomes more of a pest. But he was so beloved in that first ride. At the end of the ride, when you came off there, you identified with Figment and the possibilities that he saw in the world around him, and you could feel that. And I think that stuck with people. I think that's the reason why, especially people my age, people who remember the original ride, remember Figment and Dreamfinder so fondly and are constantly clamoring to have the characters back. So that pretty much was my experience with the ride. Anything more specific you want to know, I'll be glad to tell you.
Well, I do have a question from Facebook user Joe Madger. What are your thoughts on Dreamfinder being removed from Journey into Imagination?
For a long time, I was certain that I would never know why that happened. It seemed to make no sense. But basically, the contract that Kodak had with Disney to sponsor the pavilion had a clause in it that after 10 years, like any of the future world pavilions, the pavilion would be renovated, would be upgraded, would evolve. In the case of Journey into Imagination, the original ride lasted for about 16, 17 years. And it was a costly ride to maintain, as I understand it. But also, I have a friend of mine who was actually at the meeting when Michael Eisner said, "I hate that dragon." There was also I understand from some sources that there was a backlash at the idea of having an old bearded guy hanging around kids. So I think that may be part of the reason why they got rid of the characters completely. The ride that replaced it was just a shame. They got more negative response to that ride than anything in the history of Walt Disney Company. And I met a friend of mine who was an Imagineer back then. I had lunch with him in 2010. And the first thing he said to me when we met each other, we hadn't seen each other in years, he says, "Ron, I want you to know that I worked on the redo of Imagination, and I want you to know that I'm really sorry." Apparently, they started with some great idea that got nickeled and dined to death. And so what was there bore no resemblance to what was intended. It doesn't excuse it, but there it is. What was my other point I was going to make? The biggest complaints when they got rid of Dreamfinder and Figment came from the people in merchandising, because they were making millions of dollars a year on Figment. And so one of the major reasons they brought Figment back into the ride was just so that they wouldn't lose that revenue. Some friends of mine had a site called Friends of Figment, and they were convinced that they were the reason, that their campaign to bring back Figment and Dreamfinder was the reason they brought back Figment. But I think it was more of a merchandising deal. Witness the fact that Figment is still, and Dreamfinder are still merchandised quite a bit within the company.
Yeah, I mean, this ride is suggests a lot, and I will say, just apart from this interview, these suggestions you said everybody wants to bring back Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Just to anyone listening, I love that you suggest things in the comments of these videos, but you will not suggest something that someone has not already suggested at this point. I have so many comments asking for Journey into Imagination, so many comments asking for Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and just to do history videos on them, and then of course try to recreate them in virtual reality. The Journey into Imagination is not gone, and that's one thing that I'm hesitant to do episodes on for Defunctland, is because it's still there, kind of. It's watered down. It's not the same. I mainly deal with just extinct rides. But do you consider, Ron, that it's gone? Do you think that the original intention in the original ride is gone, or do you think after the second incarnation and they made it quote-unquote better again in the third by bringing back Figment, do you think that is still not enough?
It's gone. It's completely gone. The story, the message. See, EPCOT Center was supposed to be an inspirational park. It was supposed to touch people's lives and show you your place in the world and give you an idea of where to go in the world with your life. And I have met dozens of people who were inspired by the original EPCOT Center. The Imagination Pavilion showed you where everything else in Epcot came from, where everything in the world came from, because it all comes from the imagination, from creativity. And that is nowhere nowhere. I'll give you another one. Nowhere to be found in the current Imagination Pavilion. In the original ride, they broke down the process of imagination. People didn't really get this because the ride was so dazzling, and the special effects and the design was so dazzling that I don't think they really caught the message that we were talking about. Dreamfinder is collecting all these sparks of inspiration at the beginning of the ride, and the flying machine takes them to the Dreamport where he stores them. Dreamport is analogous to your brain, where you store ideas and inspirations. And then in the rest of the ride, he recombined those sparks of inspiration into new things, to art, literature, performing arts, science and technology. And this is how the world works. This is how our mind works every single day. There's nothing new in the world. It's all sparks of inspiration recombined into new things. That's what Tony Baxter determined when they were designing the ride. That was the message of the ride. That is nowhere to be found in any manifestation of the ride ever since. And so that's gone. That is gone. And there are ways of bringing it back. I myself had designed for my own amusement an update of that ride that would bring it into the 21st century, and could, using modern technology, get the same message across, but do it on a more personal basis where you're flying the dream catching machine, but and you're recombining the sparks. But and I'm confident, by the way, that somewhere behind locked doors at Imagineering at this point, there's another ride that they have that they would love to build. Up until a few weeks ago, there was a budget of $280 million that was earmarked for the new Journey into Imagination ride. And it just, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, they cut back on their plans for Epcot Center for the big redo that they've been advertising. There'll still be an upgrade. There'll still be some new rides, but not like what they were planning. But that'll change. That'll change. I've heard rumors through the years, dozens of rumors of different things. I remember 2 years ago, everybody was certain that Imagination was going to close on January 1st. That rumor was everywhere. And now the current rumor is that someday the characters from Inside Out will move into the pavilion, and there'll be a 3D film about Figment and all this stuff. But it all changes. It all changes all the time. And until they break ground, I don't give any credence to any of it. And then, until it opens, I don't judge it.
The theme park industry in general, it has been changing. Of course, it's always been changing. But even recently, it's been changing a lot more. I don't know if you've noticed. I'm sure you have. At Universal and at Disney, we are getting away from dark rides, physical rides, less live action based, to more screens and recorded. I guess from a live action performance perspective, how do you feel about that? Having more of these, more big screens, more pre-recorded. And this is a question I ask most of my guests, because that's something at Defunctland we take very seriously, is the invasion of screens in some of these parks.
When they built Disneyland in 1955, the big thing was Westerns. It's easy to recreate a Western street. It's easy to create Rivers of America, put a Mark Twain out there, boom. You've got an exciting and accurate depiction of that era. How do you tell a story about King Kong? Now, they tried in 1990. They opened Confrontation, and they had this 50-foot recreation of Kong made out of airbags that's picked up a tram and everything like this. But the problem was, it looked like a big toy. It didn't look like King Kong. We are a society now that gets our stories from very high-tech sources. We get our stories in movies and television on a screen. Now, if you've been on the King Kong ride at Islands of Adventure, they have King Kong on the screens, and everybody complains, "Oh, it's on a screen! It's on a screen!" Well, the problem is, how are you going to do what Kong does in the real world? You can't. It's impossible. You can put guests within that screen and have them feel, the sensation that you get from the motion simulators. And what happens with that, though, is they go to the next room and, okay, everybody, you wanted an audio animatronic Kong, there he is. The problem is, he's nowhere near as exciting, as dangerous, as threatening as the film Kong. I do not object to screens, and I think the only reason people do object to screens is because people on Facebook look for patterns to complain about. So they'll have something to post, something to rail against. Let's all bring back Mr. Toad. It's just it's like you say, it's people are trolls, and they want to complain about something in theme parks. Well, it's another screen. Well, how else are you going to tell the story of Spider-Man and make it exciting, make it visceral, except by the combination of the motion base and the dimensional sets and the screens? There's no other way to do it. And until we find another way to do it, on top of which, how are you watching these shows? What is it that you're actually seeing? Even if you go on Pirates of the Caribbean and look at all those fabulous pirates, what are you actually seeing? It's a chemical reaction in the back of your brain. That's what it is. That's what you're seeing. Face it. It's a chemical reaction that's happening in the back of your brain. What does it matter how that chemical reaction is stimulated, how it's created? If it's a screen or if it's robots, it's all a chemical reaction. So we're complaining about something, but it doesn't really matter because how we get it is still a transmission of light waves and sound waves that we're processing in our own brains. And yet everybody complains about screens. When they open up the Fast and the Furious ride at Universal Studios, everybody's going to complain about the screens.
I'm already complaining.
Of course you are. Everybody is. But the fact is, when you're sitting there in that ride vehicle and you feel the excitement of rushing down that freeway, and it feels like you're moving and the world is whipping past you so fast and it's so thrilling, you can sit there and complain all you want to, but the show works. The ride works and the story works and you're getting that thing. And, and then people will still complain, and that's fine. But the future of the industry is in its storytelling, and exciting storytelling, visceral storytelling. Our product in theme parks is not the ride, and it's not the images on the screen. It's your personal experience, your physical, emotional, inspirational, spiritual experience that you have personally within you. That's what we're creating. That's what we're selling. Now, when you're talking to me about the future of theme parks, we're talking about live performance because that's my field. And this has not progressed as far as ride technologies, and the new ride technology is coming along all the time. But if you want to see the future of theme parks, you go to Renaissance fairs, because in Renaissance fairs, the performers are free to get in your face. They're free to be bawdy and suggestive and abusive and funny, and the management keeps their hands off pretty much. So the people on the streets there in Renaissance fairs are the ones pushing the envelope. Disney has this living character initiative that is trying to go beyond the fiberglass heads of the walking around characters. So now we've got the talking Mickeys, which are getting better and better. We've got the Monsters Incorporated Laugh Floor and Turtle Talk, and these are all part of the Living Character Initiative. The problem is they're taking a purely technical attack on this. They're not. They've got to start doing this, and someday somebody will, with live actors. Not just live actors that are within a mechanical head selecting from a pre-approved list of dialogue, which is what we've got now. But the future of this is when you put a live actor in every position in the theme park. There used to be at Disneyland in 1959, they opened up the Alice in Wonderland dark ride. And there was a ride dispatcher. Just when you got on the Caterpillar, you moved forward, and before you went down the rabbit hole, there was a person sitting there at the little panel with the buttons, and they would dispatch you, and they would put a girl there dressed as Alice. And that was so cool. The girl didn't do anything. She didn't say, "I'm Alice." She didn't have any dialogue or anything like that. It was a ride operator. But You were being sent to Wonderland by Alice. She was pushing the button. Years and years and years and years later, I'm writing Peter Pan's Flight at the Magic Kingdom here in Florida. And there was a girl sitting at the dispatch panel on Peter Pan's Flight who looked just like Tiger Lily. She was stunningly beautiful with dusky skin, long, black, straight hair. And I looked over to her and I said, "This is great. I got Tiger Lily sending me to Neverland." And it was a magic moment just for me. Like I say, these things happen just inside of us personally. And when you can put an actor in every position, that's going to be a major development. Right now, we got a little bit of that. People are playing a little bit in character. You've got characters out there like Maynard at Disneyland. If you don't know who Maynard at Disneyland is, look him up. Who take the reins and do wonderful stuff out there with the guests, but they're few and far between. And but that's the real future of live performance in theme parks. The stage shows tend to regurgitate what we saw in the cartoons and come off, they pale by comparison. But it's nice to hear the songs, But that's my thought about where theme parks are going and the quote problem with screens.
Well, I agree with you on the live action actors. Star Wars Land coming to Disneyland and Disney World is ever so divisive. That some people love it, some people hate the idea of it, but everybody seems.
How can they love it? How can they hate it? It hasn't.
Haven't seen it. Yeah, exactly.
How much time do we want to waste complaining about something that we haven't seen? Because the other point that I need to make is this: we're the guests, we're the audience, we're not the Imagineers, and all we know is what we've seen. That's why people spend so much time complaining about new stuff that they haven't seen and asking people to begging Disney to bring back Mr. Toad, bring back the original Imagination ride. You wouldn't want the original Imagination ride that was built in 1982. And the technology is so completely dated that now everything that was up in the ImageWorks back in 82 is on your cell phone. Why do you want to bring that back? You got to understand that Imagineering has people on the payroll who do nothing all year but travel the world looking at new technologies and new show equipment. And these people do nothing but try to create new things. We don't know anything about what these people are doing. We don't know what's coming. And if we could dictate what was coming, we would never have the Tower of Terror. We would never have Pirates of the Caribbean or the Haunted Mansion because we are not Imagineers. All we know is what we've seen. We need to shut up and be an audience. End of rant.
I agree with that halfways. I think the Star Wars Land, my main concern is not what it's going to be. It's where it's going to be because we know that at Disneyland. But everyone seems to agree that the they're going to put live actors. They're going to be free roaming. They're going to build a story around those live actors, and they're going to blend in with guests to a certain point. And then you're going to stumble upon them. Everyone thinks that's really cool, the idea of that, having the live actors build the entire land. On the screens, yes, people really hate screens, and I'm guilty of hating screens just because I prefer a dark ride. Now, you mentioned Spider-Man, and I think that Spider-Man is a fantastic example of screens done perfectly because it's not just a screen, such as some of the other rides, such as Kong, and it's not just a screen. There's live-action props. There's buildings that are really there, and then the screens supplement what's not there. So I think the guests like the blending of every art form because that's what it should be. In my opinion, theme park attractions should blend every art form to make them, the most enriching experience, whether that be live action screens, live props, different things. But I am glad that you ranted because that's a perspective that we never have on Defunctland because that's almost the opposite of what Defunctland is. In that because we are recreating some of these rides in virtual reality, which I guess you could argue is a technology that would not have existed. So we are actually doing the exact same thing, and it is a screen. So I guess you're right in that regard. So you got me there. But yeah, so it's nice to have that different perspective. The antithesis to the idea of non-screens. And it's also nice to hear it from someone that is a veteran in the theme park industry. And I'm actually going to pose you a question that I think I'm interested to see how you're going to answer this. So before you were talking about, on your rant about people that don't like screens, such as me, you said that you haven't seen it yet, and that's kind of the idea of being the guest, is that you don't know what's coming, you don't know what you want until you're given it, and then you understand. When you look at what's happening to EPCOT, it's a bit different than simply saying, "Oh, we don't like this type of technology." It is they're asking the audience through box office numbers and through what people are talking about online what they think that we want, such as Guardians of the Galaxy, Ratatouille, different things. Just throwing this into EPCOT pavilions. Do you think that is also the wrong way to go from a innovation standpoint? Is that you would rather have EPCOT be its original intention and give guests that experience, and then they understand why they want it? Or would you rather give guests what they claim that they want? Like, we want more Guardians of the Galaxy rides, we want more Marvel rides. Which one of those do you think you lean towards?
I lean towards the original Imagineers idea of Epcot Center. You got to give a lot of credit to the people who were running Disney back in 1980. The Card Walker, Don Tatum, Ron Miller, who the Imagineers came to him and said, "We want to build a theme park with no Mickey Mouse in it. It's going to be about the real world." And these guys said, "Okay, do it." I mean, that took a lot of guts to put, $2 billion into something with no Mickey Mouse in it. Then Eisner came along and said, "Let's put Mickey Mouse in there." The Epcot Center had a purity back then. It was its own thing, and it was very pure. Since then, we've brought in a lot of great entertainment. We've added characters some places in ways that have really plussed the show and made it more accessible and entertaining for the guests. I, for one, loved Ellen's Energy Adventure because you didn't sleep through it like you did through Journey of the Universe of Energy, the original Universe of Energy. I love the addition of the Nemo characters and see no problem with adding those in living scenes. I did not particularly enjoy Test Track over World of Motion. However, I love the new redo of World of Motion, Test Track, and actually feel that it's more effective as an Epcot Center ride than World of Motion was, which was a little bit too lyrical and too much fun. I loved what Ward Kimball did with it. On the other hand, this new version of Test Track looks and feels like an Epcot Center ride, and it has that educational element, and it communicates about transportation and that whole world to people better than World of Motion did, I think. I love Mission Space because it's exciting, and it works for me on a personal basis because it gives you the isolating experience of being a space traveler. The story doesn't quite work because you're testing. No, you're not. No, you're in trouble. No, you're not. But I love the ride. I absolutely love it. So the Imagineers can blend these elements in ways that will resonate in an Epcot Center educational, inspirational way when they're allowed to. I think Ratatouille is going to be a perfect fit in France. On the other hand, I will hate to lose Impressions de France. That film is flawless and one of the best things on property.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to note that the Imagineers are probably not deciding which intellectual property they have to put in the parks. They're probably given that assignment by uppers, I'm guessing.
But like I said before, it is those parameters that make creating these things exciting and challenging. You get stuck with, you get handed a thing, and then your mission is to make it work creatively. Somebody says they're going to shove Frozen into the Norway Pavilion, and everybody goes, "Oh God, that's going to be a disaster." Well, it wasn't a disaster.
Right.
It's a glorious ride, And my current creative job is I create cabarets for a theater in downtown Orlando. They come to me and they say to me, we need to do a cabaret this year. This year we're going to do, and they'll give me a year. And I have to make a show out of the music and trivia and news of that year. They came to me after I did the first couple and said, would you like to pick the year? And I said, no, I don't want to pick the year. There's no challenge in that. I want to be stuck with a year that I have to find the show in. That's the challenge. That's the fun of it. And so the Imagineers, they don't get to pick the IPs. They may try, and they will. When the story, of course, goes that when Tony Baxter and his friend went to see Indiana Jones, the first Indiana Jones movie, they immediately, 5 minutes into the film, turned to each other and said, "Wouldn't it be great if we could do this in the parks?" Right. And that was the beginning of Indiana Jones coming to the parks.
Disneyland Opening Day. What do you remember from it? The general admission Disneyland Opening Day. What attractions do you remember riding or going to?
I was 2.5 years old.
That's fair. That's fair.
So I don't. My mother remembers looking around and saying, "Gosh, this place is nice. It'll be a shame. It'll be all run down and broken in a year." I do remember having lunch in a saloon in Frontierland. We were seated in the back. We were having lunch. It was very dark. I was completely focused on my food. There was something going on at the other end of the room that was brightly lit, but I paid no attention. 25 years later, to the day, I was the brightly lit something going on at the other end of the room. I was in that show, the Golden Horseshoe Review. But I was there opening day, but I don't remember it.
Oh, I don't blame you. I remember going to Disney when I was 2 or 3, and I just remember everything that I saw in commercials over and over again. The Dumbo, elephants, and just everything is advertised that you just like see, and you're like, oh, and then your brain makes that connection. But it's still magical for all ages. So the other question I have is one of the attractions that I like to go to at a Disney World is the Monsters Laugh floor, and you worked on this.
Yep.
What is it like to work on Monsters Inc. Laugh floor?
Well, it's a wonderful toy that they've created for us. You're paired with somebody at the beginning of the day that you're going to be doing the show with. You do the. I'm not going to give away any major things here, but you work together doing the two-head character. The one of you does Buddy Boyle, and one of you does Marty Wazowski, and it's all done in real time. We can see you out there watching us, and we can hear you because of the guy with the microphone, and it is done in real time. It is loosely scripted, but we have a lot of leeway in what we can do, and it is just a lot of fun, especially when the guests decide to when the guests cooperate. It's fun, but also when people start to cut up and try to get away with stuff, we pretty much know what's going on and have ways of handling that. We work in a theme park as a performer. There's the improv comes early in the run when you're finding out what the audience is going to do. But the fact of the matter is that audiences are the same. People are the same all over. And if you give the guest a particular stimulus, like if you're a dragon, if you're a wizard carrying a dragon, there are only 4 or 5 ways that anyone's going to respond to a wizard carrying a dragon. And as a performer, once I know what those 4 or 5 ways are, I can have prepared answers, multiple prepared answers for each one of those responses. So when I'm out there all day talking to you, I know pretty much what you're going to do. You're not going to surprise me. So when you present me with one of those responses, I will have a ready response that will make your response funny and entertaining. And it makes me look very clever. And it gives the illusion that what we're having is a magical moment that has never happened before. But it has. It's happened a lot. For example, a Figment would snatch the hat off of a child's head, and it would magically appear on Figment's head. So people come up to me decades later and say, "You took my hat off my head. Remember the time you took the hat off my head and put it on Figment's head?" And I go, oh yeah, I remember. Well, it happened thousands of times. And this is true in doing the Monsters show, or pretty much any live show where you're interacting with the audience. So our job is not the theme parks. We don't strive for constant innovation. We strive for consistent perfection. We want to create a perfect moment for you because you paid good money and you deserve it. And we need to do that consistently and keep it fresh. That's the real challenge. That's the real task in our jobs, is to do the same show over and 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 make it fresh for you. And that's what we do.
That's a fantastic way of putting that. You should write a book.
And the name of the book I should write is called From Dreamer to Dreamfinder, and it's available on Amazon. There's hardcover, soft cover, there's a digital version, and an audiobook with 9 hours of me talking.
I will pick up your book and I will read it. I'm excited to read it, especially after talking to you. And I urge everyone to pick up his book as well. This is not a plug by any means. This is just a coincidence.
No, mine is a plug. I don't know about you.
Shameless plug. So my last two questions. The first one is Chuck E. Cheese. This is a part of everyone's childhood. It's a themed restaurant chain that people are just now starting to talk about again. It's one of those things that people don't bury, but people forget what went into it, in my opinion. People are starting to talk about it more online. It's seeping itself into the theme park community, the people that like these live performance, live show themed restaurants, because people are now realizing, oh my gosh, there's characters, there's stories, there's this whole theme going on that's not happening at the arcade. It's not the pizza, it's the on stage. So what was your experience with Chuck E. Cheese? What did you do with them? What are your thoughts? Just what do you have to say about Chuck E. Cheese?
The Chuck E. Company came to a Disney subsidiary based at the studio out here, and they formed a contract to write these shows, and they were looking for a writer. And so for about 2 years, I wrote all of the Chuck E. shows. This is writing the dialogue for the robot figures and the material for the videos. And I also did the voice of a narrator for the show, which is called Mr. Mouth. It was a puppet of a mouth because you're eating pizza. And so I did that for 2 years. It's a bit of a grind. You do 5 3-minute shows in a particular season. It's changed out 3 times a year, I think. And so you're constantly writing and producing. It was a lot of fun. I got to write scripts. I got to write some lyrics. We had a terrific guy writing music. Casey Filiacci up in New York wrote the melodies, and then I would write the lyrics to them. My friend Jeff Palmer was our producer and director, and it was a lot of fun as far as it went. I also got to work on redesign for the restaurants, which went into some of the restaurants. And since you brought it up, I just heard last night a rumor. I heard this on television, actually, that they're going to phase out the robots, that they're phasing out the stage shows because people aren't paying attention to them. One of the things I noticed when I was doing the shows was that they were turning the volume down on the shows. And I put this down to the fact that the operators got sick of listening to them and the guests couldn't hear themselves talk to each other over the shows. And so they put all this money into producing these shows, but then they started turning the volume down on people so they wouldn't pay attention to them. And it's finally paid off to the point where I think they're going to get rid of the shows, which, depending on how big a fan you are of that type of thing, could be a tragedy. There was no real sophistication there. The shows were very childish. I got to do some good writing, I thought, and created some nice stuff. But I don't think anybody paid attention or remembers much of it. Now, having said that, I just discovered on YouTube all the shows I wrote are on YouTube, including there's one of Jack and the Beanstalk, which I am embarrassed to say I played the giant. So if you find that particular show, and I'm not going to help you, but if you find that particular show of Jack and the Beanstalk, you'll actually see me making a complete ass of myself as the giant in that story.
Well, I will have to put a link in the description if I can find that, so everybody can see that. That's fantastic. The Chuck E. Cheese is interesting to me because it is one of those things where intense nostalgia and, it's a themed restaurant, but adults go to Disney because there's things for adults to do at Disney. I don't know how many adults go back to Chuck E. Cheese to relive their glory days or see the stories.
They got a fan club. They had a convention this summer, I understand, of Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza enthusiasts.
That's interesting. I mean, there's a long history, so I'd appreciate the history, but I'm not sure how many of those history pop culture lovers still go and brave through the kids and the pizza to get to their to get to the front just to see the stage show. But that's interesting that you worked for them. And the final thing I have is what we are all really excited about. The theme park community is all looking forward to, or at least paying attention to, Walt's Frozen Head. This is a you can explain this. It's a movie that was crowdfunded and surpassed its crowdfunding. And just tell me about Walt's Frozen Head.
I went to a premiere. My publisher, Leonard Kinsey, wrote a book called The Dark Side of Disney, and I went to. They made a documentary about, not about the book, but loosely based on the book. I went to the premiere, and at the premiere, they showed the trailer for this movie called The Further Adventures of Walt's Frozen Head, and the trailer showed all these different characters, but it did not show Walt's frozen head. They showed everything but. And I saw the trailer, and the trailer looked okay, and I kind of went, oh, shucks, I'm sorry I missed out on working on that. A couple of months later, I'm lying in bed one night, and I checked my email, and the director had reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in auditioning for the part of Walt. So I put together, they sent me a copy of the script, which I enjoyed, and I put together a couple of video monologues, and I got the job. And so a little over a year ago, we spent 3 days in a soundstage. I shaved off my beard, and I was surprised when I shaved off my beard how much I looked like Walt Disney. Then had a makeup lady came in. She did a wonderful job on me. And we filmed all of Walt's parts, and they have been spending the interval since inserting my head into the movie.
Because they didn't originally plan for him to be in the movie. They just were going to reference him.
No. They had him in a box with a green placard in it. They knew that they were going to put him in that box, but they didn't have the actor yet, and they couldn't shoot it live because it wouldn't have worked out with a real person there. It had to be a visual effect. So they put that off until the last thing, and then they added me. And for the last couple months, I've been hearing from our director, Benjamin Lancaster, that the film's about to be finished, but they're adding music, they're adding Foley sounds. It's a nice story. It's kind of like a Frank Capra movie in that it's not a whole thing making fun of Walt or making fun of Disney. It's a kind of a heartwarming story about people who hang on to things too long. And it's the story of Walt and the fellow who finds him and brings him up into the real world to see his park. There's not a lot of stuff in the park. There is some, most of which was filmed without Disney knowing we were doing it at the time. And the entire film was actually shot, like I say, before I came along. So I had no input into what the rest of the film looks like, but Benjamin did let me do some rewriting on my part and write around some of my dialogue, so I got to put some stuff in there. And I can't wait to see it myself. I've seen bits and pieces and the rough cut, but I'm just waiting for the thing to go. They want to get it into the film festival circuit. That's their aim, but hopefully soon the people who send in money will get their copies and be able to see the movie. It's called The Further Adventures of Walt's Frozen Head, written and directed by Benjamin Lancaster, and I'm proud of the work I did in it anyway.
That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. I hope they do a wide release. I did not get on the Kickstarter soon enough, and I hope they do well on the festival circuit, and they don't get too much legal trouble for filming in the parks and filming about Walt Disney without consent.
Benjamin's handled that wonderfully. I don't think he's going to have anyone. The script is not at all derogatory toward the park or to Disney.
Right.
So I don't think they have a hassle with that. And if other films like this are any indication, I would say eventually the film is going to wind up on YouTube and people will be able to see it everywhere.
Well, I think that's everything. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ron.
I had a ball. And I'm going to look forward to going through the rest of your stuff.
Well, I hope you like it, and thank you so much for coming on. So that's it for this episode of the Defunctland podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you for listening, and thank you for visiting Defunctland.
With just that spark in me and you.